When does hitting onto a workmate constitute harassment? It's an issue dealt with in a provocative column today in the Fairfax Press by Bettina Arndt. She argues that too many cases of unwanted sexual attention are being confused with harassment and that this impedes women's progress. Bettina Arndt joins us now. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Now, you need to start at the beginning. Tell us about the story of Elise Anders, who gave a keynote address at a skeptics conference. What happened?
And after she gave her address, this couple came up to her. Apparently she'd had contact with them on Facebook, and they presented her with a card, and the card made it clear they were swingers, and it had a phone number and their names. And
a naked photo.
Well, semi-naked.
Top from the top,
you know, and handed it to her and left. So it was totally up to her whether she responded or not. She went ballistic. She's blogged almost 5,000 words about this incident, about how unprofessional it was and how outrageous it was that they would treat her like this and so on. And there's a sex therapist called Marty Klein, and he wrote about this in Psychology Today, talking about the fact that there is a difference between unwanted sexual attention and sexual harassment, and we can't protect everybody from feeling uncomfortable. And there are all sorts of other situations where we don't protect people from being uncomfortable, whether it's, you know, Jehovah's Witnesses wanting to talk to us about God. I mean, we're always confronting situations which make us squirm, but somehow sexuality is treated differently, and it's seen that we need to offer this protection to women.
So what's the difference between unwanted sexual attention and harassment?
Well, I have a lot of difficulty with that differentiation, because that's the problem, really. I mean, people would argue that it crosses over into harassment when, you know, someone makes an approach that you're not interested in, you say no, and they keep harassing you, they keep at you. Or we're not talking, you know, obviously harassment is about touching and groping and all that sort of behaviour, but there is a very grey area in the middle there. And I think it's really problematic that we are lumping so much into sexual harassment and making so many people uncomfortable about what should be normal sexual interaction, which makes life a little bit more interesting in some very boring situations like the workplace. I mean, there are a lot of women and men who like to have a little flirt, who like to tell a sexy joke. And why should we be, you know, why should the few prudish people in our midst determine whether that's appropriate or not?
Okay, Elise Anders thinks what happened to her was harassment. She blogged about it, as you pointed out. She said she found it offensive because the card she was given, the couple were naked, and that it was inviting...
Semi-naked.
Well, naked from the top up, I guess you could say, inviting her to have sex that she didn't ask for. The way she put it was, it's not okay to proposition someone at work. Do you think that's acceptable?
Look, I think it was awkward and not appropriate in a context like that. But it's not, to me, it's not a big deal. It isn't as if she hasn't seen a photo of her breast before. And she can say no. She didn't have to do anything in order to respond to that. And so, I mean, I just don't get why this was led to this huge kerfuffle.
What sort of sceptics were they?
Oh, very sceptical. Obviously.
Climate sceptics?
They weren't climate sceptics.
Oh.
I don't know who they were.
They were sceptics, like she was arguing for vaccinating children, so she was a sceptic in the scientific sense of the word.
See, in a gentler age, she could have gone to her Catholic priest and confessed the incident rather than blogging so much. You know.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's interesting, Bettina, because you referred to sexual banter. And having worked much of my life in advertising agencies where you have the creative department and the suits in two different sort of areas, you will get a lot of sexual banter, in other words, witty comments, jokes, that sort of thing in the creative area. Exactly. Whereas you go into the other office and they're quite happy about it. So it does come down to context.
It does come down to context.
And the understanding, or the implicit understanding, between the people involved in the banter. If you look at half the, you know, British sitcoms of old, were all built around innuendo, banter, you know, in whatever workplace. So it can be a good outlet if all involved in it see it as humour.
But you don't always know. I mean,
but you don't always know.
Exactly. And the unwanted, that's the big issue.
Exactly.
You tell a joke and, you know, most people might think it's hilarious, and one person might object.
One person takes offence.
Now, and I mean, I have had all these letters today, one from a man saying he told a joke in a new workplace situation, which probably was a pretty stupid thing to do, and one person objected, and there was this enormous thing about sexual harassment, and it's been on his record ever since. I mean, how crazy is that?
Well, that's the danger where you have HR departments who regulate these things outside of that context.
Absolutely.
And that can
But
get
without
tricky.
being the wowser here, I mean, the problem with workplaces, and this is a really big grey area, I understand, and employment lawyers, you know, themselves go crazy crazy over this issue. But isn't the problem that often you're not dealing with equals? So if there's a situation where there's a banter from the male boss and you're the female secretary, you feel like you have to continue to laugh along and to continue to laugh along.
Sure.
And that's when it starts to get very difficult. And I just think that it's fine when it's at a conference and there's an equal playing field, or she's even more powerful because she was the speaker. But I think it's a bit more difficult when there's that power imbalance.
Absolutely. And,
But does that
that's
mean
the
we don't
context
do any
again.
of it? You know, I mean, what's the answer to that? And the current answer is everyone's on eggshells, no one's daring to do anything.
But Tina, what's wrong with a bit of caution in this area? Because people have different boundaries. Some people get offended easily, some people don't get offended by anything. We all have different boundaries. So what's wrong with being cautious so you don't offend people in this realm where they feel uncomfortable turning up at work because they think someone's stepping over the line with them?
But why is sexuality treated so differently? I mean, we're not all covering up our arms because it would offend Muslims. There are all sorts of other areas where people are offended by certain sort of behaviour, and we don't all respond to that. Now, why is sexuality demonised in that way?
Don't people feel more threatened about sexual harassment than other forms of harassment? Isn't it? It's a different situation. I know that Marty Klein uses comparisons with unwanted forms of harassment with, you know, the Mormons turning up at your door. But isn't that very different from someone hitting onto you or making a joke that someone may find inappropriate in relating to sex?
Well, it may or may not be. I mean, for some people it may be, but maybe it's their issue. I mean, if most other people aren't reacting like that, I absolutely don't see why we constantly need to cater to the most conservative in our midst in this area.
Mormons have great sexual power, and he could have claimed her as a wife at the front door without any sexual banter at all, which is...
And there's this constant... I mean, the way we treat sexuality is so extraordinary because we have all sorts of different rules when it comes to sex.
Well, sex is uncontrollable. It's an area of great horror and fear for people.
Let's grow up, huh?
Cara, what do you think about Bettina's argument here?
Look, I think, I mean, personally, I'm of the view that people should relax, and I agree with where Bettina is coming from. The lawyer in me, knowing how employment lawyers have to, it just grunted me being a lawyer.
When you said relax, I was thinking of a jacuzzi.
But I do understand the
Banter, there you go.
But it's the lawyers that have sort of got us into this mess.
Yeah, because we make money out of it.
Yeah.
I know, but it's shocking.
But I do think that there are people
lawyers
who do need protection, and often it's an age thing or it's a status thing of, you know, where they come in the company.
Sure.
So that's why I'm a bit hesitant to say, yeah, look, everyone should just take a teaspoon of cement and harden up. I do think that we do need some lines to be drawn in the sand.
We do. But
But it's up to the individuals as well. I mean, I agree totally with what you're saying, that in a power situation you might get someone intimidated, but the majority of people in this day and age are quite comfortable saying to a boss or someone else, look, I'm not really happy about that discussion or whatever. So I think to Bettina's point, there is an overreaction. And particularly when lawyers get involved. But again, if it comes to the detriment of the workplace, so a lot of workplaces are incredibly dull and boring places. If people want to have a laugh and a few jokes to liven up their workplace, they should be permitted, not if it's upsetting someone, but if that group feel that they can do that, they should
and
be
of course,
permitted.
women can do it and men can't. And women can talk about 50 Shades of Grey,
Exactly.
or, you know, and make lots of sexy jokes, and men couldn't dare.